dear guests, Professor Maja Raunikar, Director of the National Institute of Biology, Mr. Michael Marble, Acting Public Affairs Officer of the United States Embassy, Mr. Carlo Radovac, Deputy Mayor of Piran's Municipality, Associate Professor Patricia Mozetic, Head of Department of the Marine Biology Station, and all those who have joined us today, both on location and online, welcome to the opening event to the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development here in Slovenia. Recently, the Marine Biology Station and National Institute of Biology celebrated 50 years of activity, an important milestone marked by the publication of a new book titled Coastal Ecosystems in Transition, a comparative analysis of the Northern Adriatic and Chesapeake Bay, which is being presented today. It is the result of a collaboration between scientists from the United States and Slovenia, Croatia, and Italy to promote the exchange of information on coastal ecosystems. Today, we will dive into the content of each chapter guided by its authors. But before we get into the thick of things, I leave the floor to the Director of the National Institute of Biology, Maja Raunikar. Please, the floor is yours.
Distinguished guests, dear friends, it's my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of National Institute of Biology, which is the leading research institution in biological sciences in Slovenia. Our basic and applied research leads to applications in agriculture, environment, defense, and human health protection. I'm privileged to host you here in modern facilities of Marine Biological Station, and I would like to tell you good news that we are in the process of building new infrastructure in Ljubljana, which will finish in 2023. New building will enable acceleration of NIP operations in all areas from excellence in science, international cooperation, up to fast society needs response in protection of biodiversity, climate change, environment protection, health of human, including COVID crisis, where NIP is involved in SARS-CoV-2 wastewater monitoring and testing of protective materials for masks. NIP is proud to be able to use its research results to help Slovene government and international organizations to conduct tech transfer to many companies, is co-founder of Technological Park, and helped to set up two successful high-tech spin-off companies in the field of biotechnology, Biosystemica and NIBA Labs. Today's event is a accumulation of long-standing cooperation between Slovene researchers and researchers from the United States of America, but also cooperation between institutions and American Embassy. It is extremely important for us to implement many bilateral projects between NIP and American researchers and governmental institutions. Many of our scientists were in the Fulbright scholarship holders. All past and present projects contribute in building of scientific and social global network. Since we are in the decade of oceans, I want to emphasize how important it is to understand and preserve the nature, the sea, and events like this are of great importance. I'm looking forward to today's event, and I invite you to enjoy today's event with us.
I would like to thank the Director of the National Institute of Biology for her words, and I would like to invite to the floor Mr. Michael Marble, Acting Public Affairs Officer of the United States Embassy. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you to the Marine Biology Station and to the National Institute of Biology for inviting the U.S. Embassy to participate in the event today. We are always happy to celebrate what is clearly a strong example of U.S.-Slovenian ongoing academic research collaboration, one, of course, that includes Italy and Croatia as well. This work on coastal ecosystems has brought to light that we are facing similar challenges in our coastal ecosystems, whether in the United States or in the Adriatic. Today, we can not only identify and characterize these challenges, but also find solutions to mitigate and to adapt to them together as well. This kind of collaboration between the United States and Slovenia has been facilitated in part by the flagship US government exchange programs like the Fulbright, which brings Slovenian researchers to the United States and American researchers here to Slovenia. And there have been a number of Fulbright scholars from both MBS and NIB over the years. But it has also been facilitated by a number of bilateral mobility grants to the United States under the Slovenian Research Agency and other programs. We were also pleased to be able to bring an Embassy Science Fellow from the EPA, an expert on coastal ecosystems and wetlands remediation, Clay Miller, to MBS to speak in 2018. President Biden has called upon all of us in embassies around the world to engage in climate diplomacy and to work with our partners around the world to help mitigate and adapt to climate challenges. We cannot do that without the work of scientists and researchers like those of you with us today, or live, both live as well as virtual. As other speakers will point out, many of the problems facing coastal ecosystems are caused by man, with one of the main drivers being climate change. Although those other factors driving declines in biodiversity in our seas and oceans, such as pollution or overuse, invasive species, or habitat destruction. So we humans will have to work together to solve these problems. Indeed, people-to-people interactions are at the heart of our embassy public diplomacy programs, something that's very near and dear to my own heart. And we are always looking to support them. We hope that you will encourage your students and your colleagues to apply to the Fulbright programs and to seek other opportunities to work with the United States or Slovenian colleagues in relevant research fields, and to be able to be in touch with us in ways that we can help and facilitate. Former Ambassador to Slovenia, Brent Hartley, was honored to be invited to attend this event virtually and was pleased to hear that this idea was taken to heart to build on the previous research work on coastal ecosystems in the United States and Slovenia. But I'm sorry to say he was not able to join us today for personal reasons. So I would like to end on his words. Please convey my thanks to the Marine Biology Station for thinking of me and extending the invitation, as well as my hope and support for deepening United States-Slovenian scientific cooperation. We wish you the same. Thank you.
I give my thanks to Mr. Michael Marble, Acting Public Affairs Officer of the United States Embassy. Now, I would like to introduce the Deputy Mayor of Piran's Municipality, Mr. Carlo Radovac. Please, Mr. Radovac, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear Mr. Michael Marble, Deputy Public Affairs at the U.S. Embassy of Slovenia, dear Professor Dr. Maja Ravnikar, Director of National Institute of Biology, dear Professor Dr. Patricia Mozetic, Head Department of Marine Biology Station in Piran, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Piran. Since its foundation as a medieval town, this architectural and cultural gem of the Mediterranean has hosted numerous prominent guests and attracted a number of remarkable individuals to revisit it. We are delighted to host a book presentation which represents the excellent scientific and academic collaboration of the National Institute of Biology with important international research institutions from the United States. Italy, and from Croatia. On behalf of Mayor Genjo Zatkovic, I would like to thank former Ambassador of the United States of America to Slovenia, Mr. Brent R. Hartley, for putting forward the excellent idea for an updated comparative study of coastal ecosystems of the Northern Adriatic and Chesapeake Bay on the increases of anthropogenic pressures and climate changes challenges. Piran's dedicacy for Piran's candidacy for European Capital of Culture outlined the challenges of climate changes, impacts and flood risks that this city has been facing for the past few years. It doesn't matter whether we decided to convey the message of climate change through science or through culture. On the contrary, it's very important that we address it in as many ways as possible. In search for the most viable solution to survive its impact, climate change is here and it's changing the lives of everyone on this planet. I would like to express our thanks to the National Institute of Biology and the Marine Biology Station for coordinating and carrying out meaningful projects like this one, and for putting the municipality of Piran on the global map of science. Special thanks goes to all project partners, especially the US Embassy in Ljubljana, for the fruitful cooperation. Dear guests, honorable professors and friends, thank you on behalf of the Mayor of Piran. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And let's have now a Q&A session with Patricia Muzetic, Head of Department of the Marine Biology Station. So, what are the main research topics and how have the scientific challenges changed in the 50 years of the Marine Biology Station existence?
Dear guests and colleagues who are present here in the hall and those who are following us online, a warm welcome from me too. If you take a look at the chapters in this book, you will notice that researchers of marine biology stations are the authors of most of the chapters in this book, reflecting the great multidisciplinarity of the group in marine research. From its humble beginnings more than a half century ago to the present, the scientific interest of Marine Biology Station has always been in emerging local, regional, and global ecological problems and oceanographic processes that affect coastal ecosystem structure and functioning. From the study of eutrophication, anoxia, and hypoxia, gelatinous aggregates, red tides, and other types of harmful algal blooms, and the massive occurrence of gelatinous plankton, current research addresses the global problems of the Anthropocene. These are climate change with all its aspects, bioinvasion, loss of biodiversity and habitat, pollution from marine litter and microplastics, while at the same time we are entering in the field of biotechnology. However, we recognize that excellent science and answer to the problems are not possible without collaboration in the region and beyond, and that integration in international associations, networks, and infrastructure platforms. This book in particular is a good example of long-term collaboration between partners on the both sides of the Adriatic and overseas in the United States.
In what ways are the basic scientific findings disseminated and what are their implications for the society?
Indeed, in the addition to scientific merit, which is evaluated by scientific standards, the results of basic research have a major impact on the society. This is especially true for research on coastal ecosystem and coastal zones, where many different interests overlap. In the short Slovenian coastal zone, there is a strong tendency towards a variety of economic activities involving many stakeholders, from small-scale fisheries to the port of Koper, which requires sustainable development of the coastal zone. In this context, we provide professional support and expertise to decision makers in the implementation of European and international legislation on water quality. Over the last 15 years, we have been very active in developing methodology and monitoring for assessing the ecological and environmental status of waters in accordance with Water Framework Directive and Marine Strategy Directive. We carry out assessment prior to interventions in the coastal and marine environment, when we monitor the status of existing protected areas or when the planning is foreseen. Some assessments go beyond the local scale, such as the study of possible transboundary impacts related to the construction of a gas terminal in the Gulf of Trieste some years ago. An important aspect of our activities is the popularization and promotion of marine science. Outreach activities such as open days, publications, and media appearances raise awareness of the importance of healthy oceans, thus making an important contribution to ocean literacy. Let me just briefly present a project that is a good example of a citizen science activity carried out jointly by 3 countries that recently held the EU presidency: Germany, Portugal, and Slovenia. This is the Plastic Pirates Go Europe project, which has brought together schools, science, NGOs, and ministries to assess microplastic pollution in European rivers and shores and to disseminate the results. Last but not least, we participate in the educational process at all Slovenian universities in undergraduate and postgraduate study programs and are supervisors of many Slovenian and foreign students.
Coastal Ecosystems in Transition, a comparative analysis of the Northern Adriatic and Chesapeake Bay, aims to promote the exchange of information on coastal ecosystems. It is a joint publication of the American Geophysical Union and Wiley Publishing House. This edition was first published this year and comprises 11 chapters penned by an international pool of experts. It is edited by Alenka Malej and Jadran Faganelli and Thomas C. Malone, who has sent his introduction to first book. I will be his voice today. The history of the first volume of this comparative analysis began in 1992 with a visit from a delegation of the US State Department to Slovenia and Croatia shortly after President Bush recognized their independence. The purpose of the visit was to consult with both governments on how best to enable collaboration among our countries to reinvigorate their economies. As a member of the delegation, I was tasked with focusing on marine science and mariculture. At the same time, the UN Conference on Environment and Development called for all nations to engage in sustainable development. In short, sustainable development depends on the provision of marine ecosystem services that range from fisheries and biodiversity to the prevention of coastal erosion and mitigation of coastal floods. The reason I'm emphasizing this is to highlight the fact that the provision of these services depends on maintaining healthy ecosystems in the face of human expansions. In this context, it is important to note that coastal ecosystems such as the Northern Adriatic and Chesapeake Bay are particularly important as they support 80% of the world annual marine fish landings and provide 12 trillion annually in coastal ecosystem services. However, I must also note that coastal ocean resources are in serious decline. that current approaches to environment and resource management have not yielded the desired results. Thus, regional, ecosystem-based approaches to managing the provision of ecosystem services have emerged as the way forward. As a step towards achieving this challenging goal, we conducted a comparative analysis of the Northern Adriatic and the mainstream of Chesapeake Bay 20 years ago that focused on ecosystem structure and function and the impact of local pressures on the status of these two coastal ecosystems: land-based nutrient pollution, overfishing, and coastal development. In conclusion, I want to emphasize the key role that the Marine Biology Station has played in both the preparation of this book and the implementation of some of the recommendations therein. Michele Gianni, Bill Boycott, Patrizia Mosetic, Mark Brush will introduce us to their studies reflected in 4 chapters from the 2nd to the 5th.
Increasing anthropogenic inputs of nitrogen and phosphorus and sediments to the coastal ocean via river discharge over the past 100 years are primary drivers of ecosystem degradation in many estuarine and coastal ecosystems worldwide, including Chesapeake Bay and Northern Adriatic Sea. The effect of these inputs include the annual recurrence of seasonal hypoxia, declines in water transparency, habitat loss, and loss of biodiversity. In Chesapeake Bay, severe bottom hypoxia and loss of submerged aquatic vegetation were first evident in the 1950s and 1960s, whereas the degradation signs in the Northern Adriatic Sea were occurred since the 1970s. In both systems, in the 80s, regulation were applied in order to reduce the nutrients loads, and this led to an improvement of the water quality in both systems. Also, if there was differences, as in the Chesapeake Bay, there was mainly a reduction of nitrogen, whereas in the Northern Adriatic Sea of phosphorus, in particular orthophosphate, which led to an improvement of the general water quality of the system. Anyway, still monitoring has to be carried out in order to detect the future trends, because there can be a legacy, especially regarding the nutrients and phosphorus stored in the sediments of the systems.
We physical oceanographers have been looking at changes in the circulation of the Northern Adriatic and Chesapeake Bay associated with climate. In contrast to the ecosystem, these changes may seem subtle, but they're likely to have substantial effects. Sea level rise will increase the long wave propagation speed, and freshwater inflow, which drives flows in both water bodies, is going to change. The most consequential change is in the primary driving force, the wind. We've cited decreases in the Bora and increases in the Scirocco in the Northern Adriatic. In Chesapeake Bay, we're concerned with increases in frequency and intensity of hurricanes. Clearly, these must be tracked into the future, and to that end, a conclusion of our paper is that Ming Li and I ought to travel to visit our friends in Slovenia to discuss this further.
In coastal ecosystems such as Northern Adriatic Sea and the Chesapeake Bay, primary production is dominated by phytoplankton. analysis of multi-decadal time series of phytoplankton biomass production and abundance has shown that phytoplankton biomass in both systems exhibits strong spatial gradients, annual cycles, and large interannual variability due to variations in freshwater discharge and nutrient loading. Phosphorus is generally considered the most important limiting nutrient for phytoplankton in northern Adriatic, whereas in the Chesapeake Bay, either phosphorus or nitrogen can limit phytoplankton growth. In both systems, nutrient loading has reduced in recent years, but a reduction in chlorophyll and productivity was observed only in northern Adriatic, while no such change were observed in the Chesapeake Bay. This was implied that oligotrophication is now underway in the northern Adriatic. Despite comparable nitrogen loads, the Chesapeake Bay is more efficient at converting nutrient inputs to phytoplankton biomass and production. Quantifying phytoplankton responses to nutrient load reductions will continue to be an important priority for future research in both systems, as will responses to changes in climate and other stressors.
Eutrophication is probably the most widespread and harmful issue facing coastal systems worldwide, and it's most commonly caused by the excess input of nutrients, largely due to human-based activities, into coastal waters where they stimulate algal blooms or excessive proliferation of phytoplankton and other species, the depletion of oxygen in bottom waters as those blooms are respired, and the associated decline in pH or acidification due to respiration. We synthesized the most recent data on eutrophication status in both systems, and we found that system-specific characteristics make the Chesapeake Bay much more susceptible to eutrophication than the northern Adriatic Sea. That said, both systems have exhibited numerous symptoms of eutrophication in the last several decades. The most recent data indicate that nutrient inputs have begun to decline in both systems, a process we call oligotrophication, with mixed results to date. And so we recommend that future research is needed to continue following those recovery trajectories and to understand how they interact with the myriad of other stressors occurring in coastal systems, most particularly climate change.
After these interesting video contributions, I leave the floor to the editor, Jadrana Faganelli, who will talk about the making of the publication.
Thank you. Since the publication of the first book, which I have here on the desk, which appeared in 1999, published by the same publishing house, American Geophysical Union, there have been some important developments in environmental quality regulations for the two marine basins, namely Chesapeake Bay and the northern Adriatic Sea. In the northern Adriatic, two European Union framework directives were of critical importance for the northern Adriatic in particular. First, the Water Framework Directive, adopted in October 2000, and the second, Marine Strategy Framework Directive, adopted in June 2008. Both directives have an important impact into the protection of the marine ecosystem, especially in protection of the marine biodiversity, which the capacity to support ecosystems services depends. In the United States, the introduction and adaptation of the Clean Water Act in 1972 established the goal of restoring and maintaining the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the US waters, especially coastal waters. Among them also Chesapeake Bay has been one of the dirty waters list in the EPA Environmental Protection Agency of the United States for decades. And is expected to remain on the list at least until 2025, bad perspectives. The Chesapeake Clean Water Blueprint for the Chesapeake Bay and the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement in 2014 triggered promising signs of progress. Revisiting both ecosystems 2 decades after the publication of the first comparative analysis provided an opportunity to assess changes in anthropogenic pressures and ask the question, have we reversed the decline in ecosystem health? The second assessment of the 2 ecosystems focused on local pressures that occur on the global scale, among them nutrient enrichment, coastal development, overfishing, acidification, maybe, and the global scale pressures that have local consequences, climate-driven warming, sea level rise, acceleration of water cycle, invasive species. We hoped and hope that this book could have also some educational aspect, becoming an additional textbook for postgraduate studies in marine science at the university levels. The visit of the then US ambassador, Mr. Brent Hartley, to the marine biology station in October 2016 gave a major boost to preparation of the book 20 years later, together with our American co-editor, Professor Tom Malone from the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. We prepared a book prospectus, and after 3 quite favorable reviews of the proposal, Wiley Publishing House published the book as a part of their geophysical monograph series. During the preparation of the first book, we had the advantage to leave workshop in Piran and Roville, where researchers could meet and discuss relevant issues. Unfortunately, during the preparation of the second book, this opportunity was not available. We only managed to organize a discussion meeting of the geographically closest Adriatic authors in Trieste in November 2018. The discussions with the American authors, on the other hand, took place only by net. Thank you.
And we carry on. So let's carry on with James Pearson, Valentina Turk, Jeremy Testa, Michele Mistri, Luca Bolognini, who are our next 5 authors to present their chapters.
Mesozooplankton and gelatinous zooplankton are key links between primary producers and higher trophic levels, serving as mediators of energy and material flow in aquatic food webs. Over the past few decades, dramatic changes have occurred in both the mesozooplankton and gelatinous zooplankton communities in the Chesapeake Bay and in the northern Adriatic Sea. Crustacean copepods dominate the mesozooplankton community in both regions, but the diversity of gelatinous zooplankton is much higher in the northern Adriatic Sea. In the past half-century, Chesapeake Bay has seen declines in the abundance of dominant copepod species and increasing abundance of some gelatinous zooplankton, all while the prevalence of low oxygen or hypoxic water has increased. In the Adriatic Sea over the past few decades, non-indigenous species of mesozooplankton and gelatinous zooplankton have been observed and in some cases have come to dominate the zooplankton communities. Because of their important and changing role in the food web, systematic and consistent monitoring programs for mesozooplankton and gelatinous zooplankton are needed to support resource managers and stakeholders to develop indices of ecosystem health, water quality, and marine resources.
While invisible to naked eye, microbes play a key role in carbon and nutrient cycling and maintaining a healthy ecosystem. We synthesize current knowledge on interannual variability and secular trends in microbial ecology of the Chesapeake Bay and Northern Adriatic Sea. Abundance of cyano and heterotrophic bacteria is an order of magnitude higher in Chesapeake Bay, while productivity varies over similar ranges in both systems, suggesting higher turnover in the Northern Adriatic Sea. Viruses play an important role in limiting their abundance. Temperature is an important constraint in winter and spring, while nutrients and dissolved organic carbon supply in summer. Bacterial abundance has declined in the North Adriatic since the turn of the century due to nutrient management and declines in riverine runoff, which has not been documented in Chesapeake Bay. Projected climate-driven changes in riverine nutrients loading will likely increase this contrast in microbial ecology between both systems in future.
Pelagic benthic coupling is a concept that aims to link processes happening in the water column to sediments. And for example, imagine you had high primary production in a water column, which led to deposition of organic material to sediments, some of which was remineralized, and then some of that remineralized nutrients went back to the water column to support higher primary production. The rates involved in this type of cycle are what we aimed to compare between the Chesapeake Bay and the Northern Adriatic Sea. A highlight of our budget was that we found that phytoplankton production was much higher in Chesapeake Bay, owing to its higher nutrient rates, and therefore there was higher deposition to sediments. And importantly, the ratio of this recycling to deposition was similar. So despite big differences in the rates, the relative recycling rates were comparable. Just to summarize, our analysis was possible because we had multiple rate process measurements to synthesize in both systems. And to address the impacts of future climate change on these systems, we consider that these rate processes are essential, combined with numerical simulations, to improve our understanding of pelagic benthic coupling.
Critical habitat that have been impacted by anthropogenic pressure in Chesapeake Bay and in the Northern Adriatic Sea include seagrass bed and tidal marshes, oyster reefs and coastal lagoons, all of which support important ecological services. Major anthropogenic pressures include eutrophication, coastal development, climate change, invasive species, and overfishing. These pressures are likely to persist and may become greater in the future, yet there are signs of recovery. The Chesapeake seagrass beds, for example, began a comeback in the mid-80s after decades of decline from eutrophication, mainly driven by anthropogenic nitrogen reduction. And in the Northern Adriatic Sea, eutrophication in lagoons led to episodic bottom water anoxia and a shift from benthic to pelagic primary production. But following nutrient reduction over the past 2 decades, there are signs of recovery of canopy-forming algae along the eastern coastline of the sea and of seagrass beds in western lagoons.
In Chapter 10, the authors compare the status of Adriatic Sea and Chesapeake Bay, so faraway basins, highlighting peculiarities but also similarities about the status of fish and shellfish stocks. For example, the fisheries in both sides are heavily exploited, with some overfished, fluctuate in the last 3 decades. In particular, the landings increase in the Adriatic Sea and decrease in Chesapeake Bay, but in 2016, landings were roughly equivalent between systems and estimated at about 200,000 tons per year. Other aspects affect the target species. In fact, in the Adriatic fishery exploit several small pelagic species, and invertebrate fisheries involve a variety of crustaceans and mollusks. Instead, Chesapeake fisheries target only one pelagic species, and invertebrate fisheries target just one crustacean and 3 mollusks. But both regions harvest a variety of demersal species. Other similarities regard the coupled benthic pelagic food web that are important ecologically in both systems, and also the human impact, such as dams, coastal structure, sediment, altered river flow, and diminished water quality and habitat that negatively affect the fishery species.
I would like to give the floor to the editor, Alenka Malay, who will guide us through the closing chapter of the publication penned by Tom C. Malone.
Coastal ecosystems are responsible for an estimated 80% of world fish catches and, importantly, provide various other socioeconomic benefits known as ecosystem services. However, their ability to provide these services are endangered due to anthropogenic pressures. 2 such systems under pressure are Chesapeake Bay and the Northern Adriatic that share a number of similarities in terms of physical and ecological characteristics, and these allow informative comparative analysis. Freshwater and nutrient inputs to both systems are dominated by one river. With similar average annual freshwater flows, their watersheds are similar in size and both have comparable population in the watershed. Increasing anthropogenic nutrient inputs to coastal seas over the past 100 years is the main cause of ecosystem degradation, and cultural eutrophication accelerated in the decades following the World War II. Although the annual freshwater flows of the 2 rivers are similar, the input to nutrients to the Northern Adriatic are significantly higher, but Chesapeake is more sensitive to the nutrient pollution. This is mainly due to much larger volume of the Northern Adriatic. It is deeper and wider than Chesapeake, and the 2-layer estuarine circulation of the Chesapeake. These characteristics reflect in higher primary production in the Chesapeake Bay and system-wide eutrophication, whereas eutrophication in the Northern Adriatic is largely confined to the low salinity water plums on the north and west coasts. Climate-driven increases in precipitation in the Chesapeake Bay catchment will increase the challenge of managing nutrient inputs, while decline in the Po watershed should make inputs more manageable. Hypoxia, anoxia of the bottom water typically occur in both systems from late spring to early autumn, but the temporal and spatial extent of oxygen depletion is much greater in the Chesapeake Bay than in the Northern Adriatic, where the development of hypoxia is more local and episodic. In addition to effects of oxygen depletion, coastal development has contributed to habitat degradation and loss in both systems. While the Chesapeake Bay is more affected by oxygen depletion, the invasion of non-native species is more critical in the Northern Adriatic. A greater proportion of primary production supports fisheries in the Northern Adriatic compared to the Chesapeake, where a larger fraction of phytoplankton is deposited in the benthos and metabolized by heterotrophic bacteria. Fish landings from the Northern Adriatic increased between 2002 and 2016, while landings from Chesapeake Bay decreased in the same period. The Northern Adriatic fisheries harvest several small pelagic fish, while the Chesapeake Bay fisheries exploit only one. The Chesapeake and Northern Adriatic, in both systems, they catch a variety of demersal fish. The Adriatic invertebrate fishery catches a larger variety of crustaceans and mollusks than the Chesapeake Bay. Climate-related changes include ocean warming, more frequent marine heat waves, increasing in the intensity of winds and associated storm surges, sea level rise, and changes in annual precipitation that are projected to increase in the Chesapeake watershed and decrease in the Northern Adriatic watershed. This is likely to have a range of ecological consequences. We anticipate a continued loss of tidal marshes due to sea level rise and an increase in storms. We expect loss of cold water species, migration of warm water species northward, and a shift towards smaller species with lower trophic level. Rising temperatures are likely to affect organisms by extending the summer period when predators, gelatinous predators such as medusae and comb jellies thrive. Higher temperatures may also increase the flow of energy through microbial food web compared to metazoan food webs, resulting in lower fish catches. A look at the table of ecosystem health indicators, like here are marked several: spatial extent of critical habitats, primary production, zooplankton, abundance of living resources. These all are important for maintaining ecosystem services, such as fisheries, water quality, biodiversity. This shows that most services are negatively affected by hypoxia, anoxia, and rising temperatures. In this context, the synergies between anthropogenic pressures should also be understood. For example, anthropogenic nutrient loading and increasing water temperature act synergistically to enhance spatial and temporal hypoxia, anoxia. To conclude, managing the combined effects of multiple pressures require ecosystem-based approaches. Comparison of how ecosystems respond to pressures and how ecosystem services are managed are important to our understanding of these complex ecosystems. And finally, I would like to say that events that bring together scientists and decision makers to discuss critical issues may benefit to society as a whole.
Human health and well-being, including sustainable economic development, depend on the health and safety of the world's oceans. Traditionally perceived as invincible, the ocean is under threat. At the beginning of the third millennium, the ability of ocean science to offer solutions that are relevant to sustainable development requires a massive upgrade. The Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development was proclaimed by the UN General Assembly in 2017 to bring about the lasting change needed. Recently, the Slovenian National Commission of UNESCO has established the National Decade Committee, and we take this opportunity for the official launch of the Ocean Decade in our country, which will be announced by its president, Mr. Robert Turk. Please, Mr. Turk, the floor is yours.
Spoštovani in spoštovane, dragi gostje, glede na to, da pravzaprav začenjamo z desetletjem oceanov v Sloveniji, si bom privoščil in vas nagovoril v slovenskem jeziku. Ladies and gentlemen, I will continue in Slovenian language, but I made the slides in English, so I guess we will be all happy with it. Torej, Generalna skupščina, kot smo slišali, Združenih narodov je decembra 2017 na svojem rednem srečanju razglasila to desetletje za desetletje oceana in pozvala tudi Mednarodno oceanografsko komisijo, ki deluje pod okriljem Združenih narodov, da pripravi pravzaprav en ustrezen program aktivnosti za to desetletje. Razloge za to, da se je razglasilo to desetletje oceanov, smo pravzaprav lahko slišali že danes tukaj. In v osnovi gre za to, da kljub temu, da ocean zgleda preprosto prevelik, da bi padel, da bi se mu karkoli zgodilo, je ogrožen. In to v bistvu vsi vemo. Vsi vemo tudi, da znanost v veliki meri, in tudi to smo že slišali, te grožnje pozna tudi razloge zanje. Tako da to je v redu. To, česar ne vemo, je pravzaprav, kako ta trend obrniti na glavo. Kako drugače začeti, kako priti do sprememb. In v bistvu ne vemo, skratka, kako bi to obrnili in kakšne, oziroma morali bi nadgraditi pravzaprav te naše in znanja, in sposobnosti za oblikovanje rešitev, ki bodo pripomogle k trajnostnemu razvoju. In zaradi tega je najbrž tudi geslo tega desetletja oceanov, znanje, ki ga potrebujemo za ocean, ki si ga želimo. In zato je seveda prvo vprašanje pravzaprav, kakšen ocean si želimo. Zato, da bomo vedeli, kako in kaj početi. In v bistvu ta ocean, seveda si želimo, da bi bil čist, da bi pač prepoznali vire onesnaževanja, da bi jih odstranili po možnosti. Želimo si najbrž, da bi bil zdrav in odporen z ekosistemi, ki jih razumemo, ki jih varujemo, ki jih lahko ustrezno tudi upravljamo. Želeli bi si, da bi bil produktiven, da bi podpiral oskrbo s hrano, recimo človeštvo, da bi podpiral ekonomijo, ki je vezana na morje oziroma na morski ekosistem. Želimo si, da bi bil predvidljiv, da bomo lahko razumeli in ustrezno reagirali na njegovo spreminjanje, in to nas bo gotovo doletelo. Želimo si, da bi bil varen, da ne bo ogrožal človeških življenj in pač dobrin, ki jih imamo in ki smo jih vajeni. Želimo si, da bi bil dostopen v smislu dostopa do podatkov, do tehnologij, do informacij v zvezi z oceanom. In v končni fazi želimo si tudi, da bi družba razumela in cenila seveda njegovo vlogo za zagotavljanje blaginje ljudi in nenazadnje trajnostnega razvoja. In znanost, ki jo potrebujemo, seveda mora nasloviti pravzaprav vse te lastnosti, ki jih želimo. In morda, če dobro pomislim, pravzaprav bi rekel, da je morda najpomembnejše prav to, kar je napisano na koncu tega seznama lastnosti. Kajti, če ne bomo razumeli in cenili vloge oceana, potem bomo tudi zelo težko prišli do tistih lastnosti, ki naj bi jih imel v bodoče. No in to so razlogi, zaradi katerih je Generalna skupščina se odločila za to desetletje oceanov, seveda pa je ambicija te akcije, rečemo, torej bistveno presega ne samo zmožnosti in doseg enega naroda ali države, če želite, ampak tudi presegajo zmožnosti ene skupine deležnikov, najbrž tudi ene same generacije in ne nazadnje tudi ene same znanstvene discipline. Zato seveda moramo vsi opraviti svojo domačo nalogo. Če želimo pač doseči te 3 osnovne cilje, rečemo, desetletja, ki so seveda v prvi vrsti opredeliti, katero je to potrebno znanje, zato da bomo uresničili ta naš trajnostni razvoj. Potem je potrebno seveda zagotoviti to znanje in omogočiti razumevanje oceana. In tretje, ki je po mojem še najpomembnejše in imamo s tem probleme že zdaj, seveda, uspodbujati seveda uporabo tega znanja. Saj znanja je veliko že zdaj. Potrebno je seveda prepričati odločevalce, da to znanje uporabijo in ga upoštevajo. No in kot rečeno, je bilo že v uvodu povedano, da nedavno je pravzaprav Slovenska nacionalna komisija za UNESCO na pobudo nacionalnega odbora medvladne oceanografske komisije ustanovila ta Narodni odbor za desetletje oceanov. V sestavi tega odbora se je poskušala zajeti seveda vsa raznolikost, ki je potrebna za to, da bodo tudi aktivnosti na vseh možnih področjih, in ima 15 članov, zastopani so, kot rečeno, različni vidiki človekovega delovanja na in v slovenskem delu svetovnega oceana, od raziskovanja do odločanja, od ribolova do varovanja in tako dalje. Slovenija seveda upravlja zelo majhnim delom svetovnega oceana, a so izzivi v zvezi z njegovim gospodarjenjem ali pa upravljanjem, če želite, vsaj torej kljub temu zelo veliki, kot če bi bilo tega morja bistveno več. In ambicija Slovenskega nacionalnega odbora je pravzaprav ta, da prispeva k izbiri poti oziroma prave poti, ki nas bo pripeljala od oceana, ki ga imamo, od slovenskega oceana, ki ga imamo, do oceana, ki bi ga želeli imeti. Toliko na kratko. Hvala.
Thank you very much, and we would like now to open the discussion. So let's have a Q&A session with the public in both languages. Odpiramo diskusijo, če imate kakšno vprašanje za naše avtorje, izvolite, sedaj so vam na razpolago v obeh jezikih. Se lahko pogumite, kar postavite vaše vprašanja.
Če ne, pa preberite knjigo.
Ima kdo še kakšno pripombo, ki morda ni vprašanje, bi želel karkoli povedati? Tukaj imamo na razpolago en mikrofon, kaj ne? Gospodična vam ga bo prinesla in bomo z veseljem odgovarjali. There is no questions, okay? So let's close this moment and let's say that we come to the end of our marine journey, so we truly have to remember the science we need for the ocean we want. I would like to thank you all that have been with us today, both in person and virtually online. I would like to extend the invitation to carry on collaborating, networking, and socializing. And I will close now with some short sentences in Slovene language for the next appointment that we have next week. So thank you all. Spoštovani, ob tej priložnosti vas vljudno vabimo na simpozij o okoljskih in podnebnih spremembah z naslovom V vrtincu sprememb, povezanost vode, življenja in podnebja. Pridružite se nam 14. in 15. oktobra. Virtualni dogodek je pripravljen s sodelovanjem Nacionalnega inštituta za biologijo z gibanjem Mladi za podnebno pravičnost. Hvala torej, ker ste bili danes z nami.